Change almost never comes through the door you're watching. You've been standing at that door for years maybe, watching it, waiting for the promotion, the apology, the diagnosis to reverse, the person to finally understand you, the plan to finally come together. You've kept your eyes fixed on that one entrance because that's where you decided the future would arrive. And while you were watching it, something began moving through a door on the other side of the house. A door you forgot was even there, a door you'd stopped checking a long time ago. Carl Jung noticed this pattern in nearly everyone who came to him in the middle of a transformation. The change they were consciously working toward almost never turned out to be the change that actually arrived. What arrived came sideways, obliquely, from the exact part of their life they'd stopped paying attention to. The marriage they were fighting to save quietly became irrelevant because a completely different door opened. The career they were desperate to fix stopped mattering the moment something unexpected walked in from the edge of their awareness. Jung came to believe this wasn't random. He observed that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own timing, and its own way of approaching a person, and it almost always approaches from the blind spot, from the place you're not defending, from the room you assumed was empty. Today I want to walk you through what Jung understood about how transformation actually arrives in a human life, why it comes from where you least expect it, the quiet signals that appear before your conscious mind has any idea what's happening, and what it means that you might be standing much closer to a genuine turning point than anything in your visible life suggests. If you feel stuck right now, if you've been staring at that one door for so long your neck aches from it, there's a good chance the real movement in your life has already begun somewhere behind you. Jung spent years studying what he called the autonomous psyche, the part of you that operates without your permission and often against your plans. Most people assume they're running their own inner life. They believe the conscious mind is the driver, that intention shapes direction, that if you just decide hard enough and work long enough, your life will bend to your will. Jung found this to be one of the great illusions of the modern mind. He observed that the deepest changes in a person's life were rarely the result of conscious effort. They welled up from underneath, from a layer of the self that had its own agenda entirely. He described the unconscious not as a basement where you store forgotten things, but as a living, moving force with intentions of its own. It knows things you don't. It's been watching your life from an angle your ego can't access. And when it decides that the structure you've built has become too small, too false, or too rigid for who you're actually meant to become, it begins to move. Slowly at first, then all at once. This is why the change feels unexpected. It isn't coming from the part of you that makes plans. It's coming from the part of you that's been quietly gathering evidence, storing tension, noticing what your conscious mind refused to notice. By the time it surfaces, it feels like it came from nowhere. But it didn't come from nowhere. It came from the room you stopped checking. Think about how many major turns in a person's life happen this way. Someone spends a decade convinced their problem is their job, pouring all their energy into changing careers. And then one ordinary afternoon, a conversation with a stranger cracks something open, and they realize the job was never the issue at all. Someone else fights for years to be understood by a parent, exhausting themselves at that one door, and then a small, unrelated moment, a song, a smell, a photograph, dislodges something so deep that the whole need simply falls away. The change they'd been begging for never came. A different change came instead, and it was the one they actually needed. Jung would say the psyche had been preparing that shift the entire time, beneath the surface, while the ego wore itself out at the wrong entrance. The conscious mind was busy, the unconscious was working. There's a specific texture to the period right before this kind of change. Jung paid close attention to it, and once you know what it feels like, you can recognize it in yourself. The first sign is a strange restlessness that doesn't attach to anything in particular. You feel like something is coming, but you can't name it. You keep checking your life for the source of the feeling and you can't find it, because the source isn't in your visible life yet. It's still behind the door. The second sign is that your usual solutions stop working. The things that used to soothe you, distract you, or move the needle just don't anymore. You try harder at the same strategies and get less and less return. This frustrates people enormously because they interpret it as failure. Jung interpreted it as a message. When your old tools stop working, it's often because the problem has quietly changed shape into something those tools were never designed to touch. The psyche is refusing the old solution because it wants a new life, not a repaired version of the old one. The third sign is the one almost nobody talks about. You start noticing things. Coincidences that feel too pointed to be coincidences. A book falls open to exactly the passage you needed. You think of someone and they contact you an hour later. A theme starts appearing everywhere you look, in conversations, in what you read, in the dreams you suddenly remember. Jung had a word for this. He called it synchronicity, and he took it more seriously than almost anything else in his later work. Synchronicity, as Jung understood it, is a meaningful coincidence, an event in the outer world that lines up with something moving in your inner world, in a way that carries significance even though there's no ordinary cause connecting them. He didn't think these moments were magic. He thought they were evidence that the boundary between your inner life and outer life is thinner than we pretend, and that during periods of transformation, that boundary becomes especially porous. The unconscious, gathering itself for a change, starts reaching toward the surface in whatever way it can, through dreams, through images, and sometimes through the strange arrangement of outer events. When these coincidences start clustering in your life, Jung would say it's rarely an accident of timing. It's often a signal that something in the depths has become active. An archetype has constellated, to use his language. A deep pattern of meaning has switched on inside you, and it's beginning to pull events and images toward itself the way a magnet organizes iron filings. You feel it as an eerie sense that your life is trying to tell you something, and it is. The reason this all feels unexpected is that we've been trained to look for change in the wrong register entirely. We watch our circumstances. We wait for the external situation to shift, the phone to ring, the offer to come, the other person to change. But Jung found that real transformation almost always begins internally and invisibly, long before it shows up in your circumstances. By the time your outer life visibly changes, the inner change has usually already happened. The visible event is just the last domino, not the first. This is where so much unnecessary suffering comes from. People stand at the visible door, judging whether their life is changing by whether that door has opened, and they conclude that nothing is happening. Meanwhile, the actual transformation is well underway in a place they don't know to look. They feel stuck at the exact moment they're moving fastest. They feel abandoned by life in the precise season when their psyche is most active on their behalf. There's a particular kind of person who arrives at this threshold and misreads it completely. Picture someone who has done everything right by the visible measures. They've built the life they were told to build. And somewhere in their late 30s or their 50s, or on some unremarkable Tuesday, a quiet dread starts leaking into everything. They can't explain it. Nothing is wrong. They have what they wanted. And yet a voice underneath keeps saying this isn't it. This was never it. They try to argue with the voice. They try to be grateful, to fix their attitude, to push the feeling down. And the harder they push, the louder it gets, because it isn't a malfunction to be corrected. It's the sound of the door behind them beginning to open. If you're feeling something like this right now, a restlessness you can't place, a sense that your old life is thinning out, a strange clustering of coincidences you keep noticing and dismissing, you might find real value in slowing down enough to listen to it properly. We put together a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's work, built specifically for this kind of in-between season, when something is clearly moving but you can't yet see what. It's a way to start checking the door you've been ignoring instead of staring at the one that hasn't opened. You'll find it linked below. And now let's talk about what actually walks through that door when it opens. Jung had a principle he returned to again and again, borrowed from an ancient Greek idea. He called it enantiodromia, the tendency of any extreme thing, over time, to turn into its opposite. He observed it constantly in the lives of the people he worked with, and in the movement of history, and in his own life. When something in the psyche has been pushed too far in one direction for too long, it eventually swings hard toward the other side. The person who spent their whole life being agreeable erupts into an unrecognizable fury. The relentless achiever loses all ambition overnight. The one who never cried becomes unable to stop. This is why the change so often feels unexpected, because it frequently arrives as the reverse of everything you've been. The very trait you built your identity around becomes the thing that dissolves, and the quality you rejected, exiled, and swore you'd never be, that's often exactly what comes to save you. Consider what this means. If you've organized your entire life around being strong, the change that's coming might arrive dressed as a breakdown, as an inability to hold it together, as a vulnerability you'd have done anything to avoid. And you'll experience it as catastrophe, because it looks like the death of your whole identity. But Jung would say it's the psyche restoring balance, forcing you to reclaim the part of yourself you left behind, and that on the other side of that apparent collapse is a fuller, more complete person than the one who could only ever be strong. If you've spent years being endlessly available, the change might come as a sudden and shocking need for distance that horrifies everyone around you, including yourself. If you've been the responsible one, it might come as a wild impulse to walk away from everything you've dutifully carried. These impulses aren't signs of dysfunction. They're the exiled half of you demanding, finally, to live. The unexpected direction of the change is precisely the point. The psyche is not interested in giving you more of what you already have. It's interested in wholeness, and wholeness always requires the missing piece. This is the part people find so disorienting. They keep waiting for change to look like an improvement on the current trajectory, a better version of the same life. And instead, it looks like a contradiction of the current life. It looks wrong. It looks like a mistake. The lawyer feels pulled toward something creative and unprofitable. The person who prized independence suddenly aches for deep commitment. The one who chased success finds themselves inexplicably drawn to slowness and smallness. From the outside, and often from the inside too, it can look like someone losing the plot. Jung would say they're finally finding it. He described the deep organizing center of a person as the self, the fuller totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious together, the part that knows what a complete life would actually require of you. The ego, the little I that makes your daily plans, only sees a fraction of the picture. The self sees all of it. And when the self begins to assert itself, it moves you in directions the ego would never have chosen, because the ego was optimizing for a life that was too small. This is why Jung said the second half of life so often reverses the values of the first. In the first half, you build the structure, the identity, the career, the persona that lets you function in the world. And it's necessary. You have to become someone before you can discover who you actually are underneath that someone. But there comes a point where the structure that helped you rise becomes the cage that keeps you small. And that's when the psyche makes its move. It begins dismantling the very thing you spent decades building, not to destroy you, but because you've outgrown it. The people who suffer most through this are the ones who cling hardest to the old identity. They interpret the dismantling as an attack. They double down on being who they've always been. They pour more energy into the door that's already closed. And they can hold that position for a while, sometimes for years, at enormous cost. A low, constant depletion that never quite lifts. Jung watched people spend the entire second half of their lives defending a version of themselves that had already stopped being alive. He called this stagnation, and he considered it a far greater danger than the chaos of transformation. Because here's what he understood. The change is going to happen either way. The only question is whether you cooperate with it or fight it. The unconscious will keep pressing, keep sending dreams, keep arranging coincidences, keep making your old solutions fail, keep leaking dread into the life that no longer fits. You can spend years resisting, and the pressure will only build. Or you can turn around, walk toward the door you've been ignoring, and find out what's been trying to reach you. There's something almost tender in how the psyche does this, if you can see it. It doesn't demolish your old life all at once, out of cruelty. It gives you signals first. It sends the restlessness, the failing solutions, the strange coincidences, the vivid dreams. A whole vocabulary of hints, escalating in intensity, hoping you'll notice before the more forceful methods become necessary. Jung believed that if a person could learn to read these early signals, they could enter their transformation consciously, as a participant, instead of being dragged through it as a victim. The material of the change is the same. The experience of it is completely different depending on whether you're resisting or cooperating. Let me describe what cooperating actually looks like, because it's more concrete than it sounds. It begins with attention. You stop dismissing the restlessness as a mood and start treating it as information. You stop calling the coincidences meaningless and start asking what they might be pointing at. You start writing down the dreams that stay with you in the morning. You give the quiet voice a hearing instead of arguing it into silence. You turn, even slightly, toward the door you've been ignoring, and you ask what's behind it. What you usually find, at first, is not an answer but a feeling, a pull towards something you can't yet justify, a subject that keeps catching your attention, a longing you're embarrassed to admit. Jung would tell you not to demand that this feeling explain itself immediately. The unconscious speaks in images and impulses long before it speaks in clear plans. Your job in the early stage isn't to figure out the whole future. It's to follow the thread, to take the next small step in the direction of the pull and see what the next signal is. This is where synchronicity often intensifies. Once you begin cooperating, once you turn toward the change instead of away from it, the meaningful coincidences frequently multiply, as though the psyche is confirming that you're finally on the right track. You take one step toward the new direction, and a door opens that you couldn't have opened yourself. Someone appears. An opportunity surfaces from a place you weren't looking. Jung didn't think this proved the universe was rewarding you. He thought it revealed that you'd finally aligned your conscious intention with the deeper current that was already flowing, and that swimming with that current is a fundamentally different experience than fighting it. The unexpected change, in other words, isn't only unexpected in its direction. It's unexpected in how it arrives. It doesn't tend to arrive through force of will. It arrives through a kind of listening, a willingness to be led by something wiser than your plans. This is deeply uncomfortable for the modern mind, which has been taught that you make your life happen through effort and control. Jung spent his career trying to correct this. He believed the most important things in a life are not achieved, but received, that they come to you when you've made yourself available to them, and that the making available is the real work. Now, I want to be honest about the difficulty, because Jung never softened it, and neither should I. The period when the old life is dissolving and the new one hasn't formed yet is genuinely hard. You lose your footing. The identity you knew stops working, and the new one hasn't arrived. You may feel for a stretch like you don't know who you are or what you want or where you're going. The people around you may not understand what's happening to you, and some of them may resist it because your old self was part of an arrangement they were comfortable with. When you start changing, the arrangement destabilizes, and not everyone will welcome that. Jung was clear that this in-between phase can't be rushed. You can't skip from the old life to the new one without passing through the disorientation between them. The temptation, always, is to grab the first available replacement, to seize a new identity, a new relationship, a new certainty, anything to end the discomfort of not knowing. But he warned that whatever you grab in a panic to escape the emptiness is almost never the real thing. It's just a new mask, adopted to avoid the vulnerability of being genuinely open. The real transformation requires you to tolerate the not knowing long enough for something authentic to form, to stay at the open door without demanding that whatever's behind it show its face on your timeline. This is why some people never complete the change even after it begins. They start well. They notice the signals. They turn toward the new direction. They feel the pull. And then the discomfort of the in-between becomes too much, and they retreat to the old life, patching it back together as best they can. From the outside, it looks like they came to their senses. Jung would say they lost their nerve at the threshold, and he observed that the retreat rarely restores the old peace, because you can't unknow what you've started to see. Once the door has opened, part of you will always know what was on the other side, and part of you will always be haunted by the life you almost walked into. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because if you're standing at that threshold right now, the most important thing you can do is understand what you're actually looking at. You're not falling apart. You're not too late. You're not being punished by a life that forgot you. You're standing at the exact spot where a genuine change enters a human life. The disorienting, unglamorous, easily misread spot that almost everyone mistakes for failure. And what you do in this spot matters more than almost anything you'll do in a clearer season. If you want help staying steady at this threshold, a way to read the signals your own psyche is sending instead of drowning them out, the True Self-Discovery Guide was built for exactly this stretch of the road. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's approach, designed not to rush you towards some tidy answer, but to help you tolerate the in-between long enough for the real thing to take shape. It's a way of turning toward the door instead of away from it. The link is right below. Let me tell you what tends to be waiting on the other side, because Jung was consistent about this across decades of watching people cross over. What emerges is rarely the specific thing you would have predicted, but it almost always has the same quality. It fits. The new life, when it forms, has a rightness the old life never had, even if the old life looked more impressive on paper. People describe it as feeling like themselves for the first time, as if they'd been wearing clothes that never fit and finally took them off. The external circumstances vary wildly. Some people's lives change dramatically, others change quietly, but the internal shift is remarkably similar. A sense of being rooted in something real. A center that doesn't depend on other people's approval. A quiet that the old, striving self never knew. Jung believed this was because the change, when you let it complete, brings you closer to who you actually are rather than who you were performing. The unexpected direction turns out to have been the honest direction all along, the one your conscious mind was too invested in the old story to see. What looked like your life falling apart was your life falling into alignment. And the reason it had to come from the blind spot, from the door you weren't watching, is that your conscious plans were built around the very identity that had to change. You couldn't have planned your way to the new life, because the person doing the planning was the person who had to be outgrown. This is the deep reason Jung trusted the unconscious more than the ego's agenda. The ego wants to preserve itself. It wants a better version of the current arrangement. Left to its own devices, it would keep you circling the same door forever, optimizing a life that was never yours. The unconscious has no such loyalty to the old self. It's loyal to your wholeness, to the total person you're meant to become, and it will keep opening unexpected doors until you finally walk through one. So what does this mean for you, standing wherever you're standing right now? It means that the stuckness you feel may be far less permanent than it appears. It means the absence of visible change is not evidence that nothing is happening. It means the restlessness, the failing solutions, the strange coincidences, the dreams you can't shake. These are not symptoms of a life going wrong. They may be the early language of a life about to turn. And it means the change, when it comes, will probably not look like what you've been waiting for. It'll come from an angle. It'll contradict something you were sure about. It'll ask you to become someone the old you would barely recognize. Your work is not to force it. You couldn't force it if you tried because it doesn't answer to force. Your work is to notice, to stop staring so hard at the one door that you miss the movement everywhere else, to take the signals seriously, to follow the pull one small step at a time, even when you can't yet justify it, to tolerate the in-between without grabbing a false replacement to end the discomfort, and to trust, not blindly but based on everything Jung spent his life documenting, that the part of you moving underneath knows where it's going, even when the part of you making plans is completely lost. Jung wouldn't promise you that the change will be easy, or that it'll arrive on your schedule, or that it'll look the way you hope. He was too honest for that. What he would tell you is that the change is real, that it's already in motion whether you can see it or not, and that the strange, disorienting, unexpected shape of it is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. Transformation that you could have predicted and controlled wouldn't be transformation at all. It would just be more of the same, rearranged. The fact that it's coming from somewhere you didn't expect is the surest sign that it's the kind of change that can actually make your life new. So keep your eyes a little softer now. Stop guarding that one door so fiercely. Something is moving in the rooms you stopped checking. The dread that's been leaking into your days, the coincidences you keep noticing and dismissing, the quiet voice saying this isn't it. These aren't the end of your story. They're the sound of a door you'd forgotten about, somewhere behind you, beginning to open. And what walks through it is going to be more yours than anything you've ever planned for. You don't have to know yet what it is. You only have to be willing to turn around. The life that's coming for you is unexpected precisely because it's the real one. And the real one was never going to come through the door you were told to watch. It was always going to surprise you. That's how you'll know it's true. If you haven't yet, take a look at True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises built on Jung's work, made for exactly this kind of turning, when you can feel something moving but can't yet see its shape. A way to start listening to the door behind you instead of straining at the one in front of you. The link is right below, and whenever you're ready, it'll be there.